Chapter 2279 Meteor Explosion. Bongchi narrowed his eyes, unwilling to let Liangyu get closer. The advantage of his weapon was in medium and long-range combat, not close combat. This pair of crescent blades, which are as big as his body, makes it inconvenient to move them close to him. Get out here. The rapidly spinning chain in his hand was suddenly thrown into the storm. He was sure that Liangyu would find it difficult to avoid this attack due to the high-speed rotation. Even if you can dodge, the rhythm of rotation will definitely be disrupted. Call. The chains shot into the storm. Liangyu's eyes focused, and a terrifying force burst out from the chains. Meteor blast. Bongchi's energy spread along the chains, directly causing a terrifying energy explosion in the storm. But Liangyu's body bent as if it had no bones, then twisted away from the range of the explosion and continued to spin like a fox. This time she came to Bunch's right side. The rear is exactly the focus of Bongchi's defense. Bongchi is right-handed, so he subconsciously pays attention to the defense on the left side. However, the right hand holding the knife is not convenient for resisting the attack from the right side. Liangyu finally launched the attack. The distance was close enough, and a powerful force suddenly attacked Bongchi. Boom! The black energy broke through the air, and Bongchi instantly sensed the enemy's attack. Although the attack was extremely fierce, his martial arts skills were no joke. His body twisted suddenly, and the huge crescent blade in his right hand could not be swung at this moment, so he simply used it as a shield to block in front of him. The powerful energy bombarded the crescent blade, and the huge impact force made Bongchi's body move 2 steps before all the force was released. Liangyu had already rushed over and smashed Bongchi's body with copper hammers in both hands. At this time, Bangchi threw out a chain, which could not be taken back in a short time, and he had to face Liangyu's close combat head-on. He could only choose to block it with a single knife. Liangyu smashed Bongchi's hammer hard, but was blocked by the huge crescent blade. But that powerful force also made Bongchi feel pressured. This female human has such strong power. Although Bongchi felt a little oppressive, he was not afraid, but just a little surprised. As a lizard man, his strength is naturally superior to that of humans, so he is not afraid of a head-on collision with Liangyu. Liangyu took the initiative, and the 2 copper hammers in his hands smashed down like raindrops. Bongchi seemed to be struggling to block the 2 copper hammers with a crescent blade. Even if the other crescent blade was retracted, it would not be able to gain any advantage against Liangyu's attack with such a large blade. After all, in terms of body shape, Liangyu is less than half his height. The feeling of close combat is like a powerful monkey crawling on a human and scratching you madly, but those sharp monkey claws may take your life. What a horrible human being! Bongchi had such a feeling in his heart, but at this moment, a shrill cry for help suddenly came from his communication device. Someone come and rescue. His Majesty the Emperor, His Majesty the Emperor has been killed. When Bongchi heard the news, even with his iron will, his brain went blank in an instant. He is the commander of the royal guard, and protecting the royal family is his greatest responsibility. But now, the emperor was killed? The doll-looking female human had been on the stairs for less than 5 minutes. How did the battle end? What about the armor of the end? Why didn't it work? I can clearly feel that terrifying breath. Bongchi's mind was completely blank, but when 2 masters fight, losing consciousness is an extremely fatal thing. It was this moment that gave Liangyu the opportunity. His heart was unsteady, and he couldn't hold the knife steady either. Liangyu suddenly exerted force with his arms and swung the 2 copper hammers with all his might. With a clang sound, the huge crescent blade flew out of Bongchi's hand. Liangyu shouted loudly and swung the copper hammer at his body. Bongchi was wearing heavy armor, and the copper hammer was a sharp weapon for breaking armor. It didn't need to hit the head. As long as it hit any part of the body, it would cause the flesh and blood to explode and cause serious injuries. Bongchi finally regained his will. Seeing Liangyu's copper hammer coming at him, he tried to forget about other things for the time being. He knew that the woman in front of him was very powerful and could not be defeated easily. He simply threw away his chain scimitar and raised his arms. He was wearing heavy armor on his arms. Facing Liang Yu's copper hammer, he opened his arms like a goalkeeper welcoming a football and took it directly with both hands. Bang! The two copper hammers were directly held in Banqi's hands. Liang Yu clearly heard the sound of crack, and Banqi's palm armor and his hand bones were shattered. Green blood dripped down, but Liang Yu felt that his copper hammer was clamped by something and could no longer be pulled out. Banqi stared at Liang Yu. Meteor explosion. The power of the energy burst out from his palm and rushed directly towards Liang Yu, like a terrifying nuclear bomb explosion. A huge air wave rushed through the streets, sweeping across several streets and destroying everything. But a cheetah-like figure suddenly descended from the sky. Liang Yu fell to the ground without a single scratch on his body. What a terrifying power! Her eyes were as sharp as a knife as she sighed. However, since I already know your ability, which is a close-range burst of energy, how could I not be prepared? She was indeed prepared to trade injury for injury, but the prerequisite was that her attack had to make Banqi lose his combat effectiveness. Only then would it be worthwhile. After a brief pause, Liang Yu looked at her empty hands. The copper hammer had been taken away by the other party due to his injury. She needed a new weapon. It is impossible to fight the opponent directly with fists, because once there is close contact, the opponent's meteor burst can directly cause maximum damage to her through physical contact. Liang Yu opened the weapon box again, and this time she took out a folding short bow. There is no way she would use a gun because for a warrior of the strengthening system, only cold weapons can bring out the maximum power. A compound bow that looks delicate and small, made entirely of metal as the main material. The power of drawing the bow alone is terrifying. And after Liu Karen's transformation, the power it can exert can be increased by more than 10 times. The compound bow is considered the pinnacle of cold weapons. Liang Yu raised the compound bow in his hand and took out a bag of short arrows from the weapon box, with only 10 arrows. Chapter 22 80 Meteor Explosion, Part 2. She quickly drew her bow and arrow, and powerful energy condensed on the compound bow and short arrow. The terrifying power turned into a storm and surged wildly around her. Kalala. The bowstring was quickly tightened and quickly pulled into a full moon. The biggest advantage of a compound bow is that it can produce the greatest damage with the least amount of effort. However, in order to adapt to Liang Yu's physical strength, Liu Karen made special modifications to it. It is no exaggeration to say that when Liang Yu pulled the bow with all his strength, the extremely expensive arrow made of metal could penetrate a 30-meter thick steel plate. This is just the strength level. If we consider the chi force, it is no problem to destroy the city wall of a regional capital with one arrow. Banqi felt the opponent's arrow ready to be fired, and he couldn't help but feel a headache. He did not carry as many weapons as the other party. After all, it is rare to find an all-round weapon master like Liang Yu. After discarding the chain scimitar he carried with him, he only had the saber to use and the armor he was wearing, which was as good as the silver armor. But he had a feeling that it was very foolish to rely on the power of armor to defend against the enemy's arrows. So Bunch drew his dagger from his waist. It is called a short knife, but the length of this knife is much longer than Liang Yu's arm. Liang Yu is now in a state of harmony between man and nature, and her perception of everything around her had become ethereal, and any subtle changes could not escape her eyes. There was no fear in her heart, so she didn't tremble due to emotional fluctuations when she attacked. What's more, at this moment, the battle situation of the entire Wulwan Empire is in their favor. Kaka. The compound bow was stretched to its limit, and Liang Yu's bow-drawing posture was extremely elegant, with her legs apart and in line with her shoulders, and her arms stretched straight but not stiff. After locking onto Banqi's eyes, Liang Yu shot the arrow directly. Boom! The sound of breaking through the air was like a huge cannon firing, and the sound was like thunder. The ultra-high-speed arrow directly caused the surrounding air to be cleared, forming a cylindrical area of vacuum. The arrow was so fast that Liang Yu and Banqi could hardly see its trajectory with their naked eyes. As a top warrior, He can only rely on his senses and a hint of afterimage to capture its position and trajectory. Bunch held the dagger in his right hand to block in front of him, trying to remain calm in the face of the attack. At the critical moment, he swung his strong arm backhand. Ka-ka-ka. The blade of the dagger actually blocked the tip of the arrow exactly, making an extremely harsh sound of metal friction. In terms of strength, Bang Chi is actually better than Liang Yu. Although he felt the pressure from the super compound bow at the moment of contact, Ban Chi was still able to resist. However, the sharp arrow hit the blade hard, and the sound of crackling continued to be heard, as if a mouse was gnawing on the table leg. Ban Chi was suddenly startled and suddenly had an extremely bad feeling. It happened so quickly that everything happened in a flash. He was trying to force the arrow away, but with a crisp crack, his dagger broke. The arrow broke it in half, sending pieces flying everywhere. Ban Chi's pupils contracted rapidly, and he could hardly believe what he saw. That tiny arrow is short for humans, let alone for the huge Ban Chi. It is as long as a finger. But such a short arrow actually broke his dagger. The weapons he used were also made of the Wulwan Empire's top-level military technology, so how could they be so fragile? What he didn't know was that Liang Yu had the most complete range of weapons, and these were also the cold weapons that Liu Karen put the most effort into. Each weapon is made of the latest type of e-metal. After integrating the technology of mechanical civilization, there are few materials known in the world today that can surpass its toughness. These 10 arrows are all expensive and extremely rare super arrows. In this collision, Ban Chi misjudged the weapon and the dagger in his hand was directly shattered. Although the arrow was deflected a little, it still shot towards his body. Ban Chi was so surprised at this moment that he quickly dodged. Fortunately, the dagger had absorbed most of the arrow's force, so even though it was right in front of him, he was able to dodge it. However, Liang Yu seemed to have anticipated everything and had already drawn his bow and shot his arrow again. Not just one shot, but a series of arrows. The compound bow greatly reduces the pressure of drawing the bow and arrow, so the bow can be drawn quickly and continuously. Liang Yu was not frugal either and shot 5 arrows in one breath. Without a weapon in his hand, Ban Chi could only dodge in a panic. Huh! He roared, his legs suddenly tensed up, and then burst out with powerful strength, resulting in an extremely high speed of movement. The arrow was too powerful, and he didn't dare to confront it head-on. He could only dodge or slap the side of the arrow with his palm. But even so, it was difficult for him to completely avoid the 5 arrows shot in succession. A small arrow pierced deeply into his shoulder, easily passed through his breastplate, and then pierced into his flesh. Although the arrow was small, it carried Liang Yu's energy just like a poisonous stinger bomb, directly shattering half of his shoulder. Snort! Bunch groaned, covered his shoulder in pain and retreated, while injecting himself with medicine. Liang Yu would not miss such an opportunity. This time her weapon changed again, becoming a 9-section whip. To deal with such a ferocious beast, soft weapons are more suitable. Liang Yu will not have the upper hand in a battle of brute force. She approached him, not giving Ban Chi any chance to recover, and just chased him relentlessly. The 9-section whip widened the distance between the two, and the use of meteor explosion also had to be timed well. However, this 9-section whip is like a tricky poisonous snake, and it is much more difficult to use than his chain scimitar. The lizard men, who have powerful bodies, do not seem to be good at studying the variability of weapons, but rather prefer the collision of power. There is nothing wrong with this. It's just that when the power difference between the two sides is not much, the difference in skills becomes very obvious. Liang Yu still used the Bagua Yushin palm method, spinning around Bang Chi at high speed, and then attacked him unexpectedly with the 9-section whip. This attack is extremely strange, flexible and changeable, and it is impossible to predict its trajectory. Soon, Bunch had more than a dozen wounds on his body. The pain in his left shoulder had not completely dissipated, and Ban Chi was also vaguely worried about the Emperor's death. No, we can't go on like this. Even if His Majesty dies in battle, the Grand Marshal is still alive. I can't give up hope. We must kill this woman as soon as possible and then launch a counterattack. Chapter 2280, One Destined Ending. Bunch realized that in terms of agility and the use of weapons, he was far inferior to this tiny human woman. But his advantage lies in his huge body and strength. Bunchy suddenly became furious. Call out. When the 9-section whip attacked again from behind, he turned around suddenly. Liangyu thought he wanted to avoid the attack of the 9-section whip and then find a way to counterattack. But she was wrong. Bangchi turned around, completely ignoring the sharp spikes at the end of the 9-section whip stabbing at his body, and then locked Liangyu's position along the direction of the 9-section whip. Just like that, he let the weapon pierce his chest, then opened his big hands and pounced towards Liangyu. Puff! The 9-section whip pierced into Bangchi's body, but Bangchi, who had been prepared, clamped it with his muscles and prevented it from going any deeper. He pounced on Liangyu like an iron tower. At this time, Liangyu could only choose to abandon his weapon and escape, or continue to fight in close combat. However, the weapons in the weapon box are almost used up. All she had left now was this 9-section whip and a dragon-crying long sword. If she loses her weapon, she will be at a disadvantage in the battle with Bangchi. This guy. Liangyu suddenly realized that the other party wanted to use the strength of his body to force her to give up her weapon. Hand-to-hand combat without weapons is impossible. Thinking of this, Liangyu suddenly became ruthless, releasing the energy in his hand and stabbing it deep into Bangchi's body along the 9-section whip. The spike that had already pierced Bunch's chest forced its way back inside. Blood was already flowing out of Bunch's mouth. But he looked indifferent. It doesn't matter. Your whip is thin and long, like a hair. Even if it pierces my internal organs, it won't cause a fatal injury. But before that, I will catch you and crush you to pieces. His big hands were like a cage. As long as he caught Liangyu, he was sure that Liangyu would find it difficult to break free with his strength advantage. At that time, Liangyu, the toy in his palm, will be directly crushed to pieces by him using the meteor explosion with absolutely powerful force. Liangyu's eyebrows stood up like sharp swords. The other party was risking his life, betting that his defense was strong enough to kill Liangyu before Liangyu's 9-section whip destroyed his body. But Liangyu has never been afraid of death. As a warrior, courage is an essential quality. Since the other party is determined to fight for his life, she will fight to the end. Liangyu simply gave up the idea of escaping and went all out, abandoning the idea of escaping and putting all his strength into the 9-section whip. Puff! The 9-section whip penetrated a long way into Bangchi's body again, and blood gushed out from the corner of Bangchi's mouth like a fountain. But the expression on his face was ferocious, and the pain only aroused his ferocity. Neither of them cared about defense. They were determined to kill each other. The two bodies were approaching each other rapidly, and Liangyu seemed unaware of Bangchi's big hands. The 9-section whip continued to pierce into Bangchi's body like a poisonous dragon, and Bangchi's huge palms closed in midair, forming a steel cage that slowly surrounded Liangyu. Puff! The 9-section whip had penetrated more than halfway, piercing through Bangchi's muscles and sternum, heading straight for his internal organs. And Bangchi's hands have completely trapped Liangyu, forming an inescapable cage. A strange arc appeared on Bunch's face. You want to die with me? You are so naive. He roared angrily and exerted force with both hands. Galaxy Starburst. At this moment, he unleashed the most powerful attack in his life. In the desperate situation of life and death, he broke through his own shackles. This attack surpassed every previous battle. The white light quickly condensed and exploded in his palm. The terrifying power made people feel that there was a god of death of love in his palm. He covered his hands tightly, not letting any of this power leak out. Even if his hands were blown off, he would use this blow to completely kill the woman in front of him. He covered up the sound of the explosion tightly and forced it to shrink into a small space. Clatter. The 9-section whip also suddenly accelerated, and after entering his chest cavity, It began to turn like a poisonous snake, and the sharp spikes at the end directly pierced his heart. Puff! The huge heart was directly pierced by the 9-section whip. Pah! A large amount of blood spurted out of Bunch's mouth, and the severe pain in his heart made him realize what had happened. But for the lizard man with strong vitality, this was not a fatal injury. The vitality of the lizard men is already strong, not to mention the Black Chariot level enhanced alien Banshee. He cannot be killed unless his heart is crushed. However, this injury is not without impact and will greatly reduce his physical functions. The premise is that the other party will not continue to attack his heart. He was absolutely certain that the woman in his palm was dead, and most likely had been turned into ashes by the extremely powerful energy. But the next moment, his confidence turned into fear and confusion. Because the 9-section whip actually burst out with an extremely powerful energy, which directly shattered his heart. The huge heart shattered completely with a pop sound, like a smashed watermelon. How so? Bunch couldn't believe this fact. He slowly opened his hands, but was shocked to find that the expected scene of Liangyu turning into ashes did not appear. She was dressed in pitch-black armor and stared at Bunch coldly. Everyone has a share of the demon mecha. Bunchy's huge body fell to the ground with a strong sense of unwillingness, but victory and defeat are so cruel. The battles between enhanced mutants are often a fight to the death. Liangyu raised his hand and pulled the long 9-section whip out of his body. She walked silently to Bunchy's body and reached out to take the alien origin from his forehead. Staring at this powerful alien, although he was a foreigner, Liangyu still gave him the respect that a warrior deserved. In this battle, I have the advantage in weapons. Otherwise, we would most likely end up destroyed together. Everyone serves their own master. There is nothing much to say. Liangyu walked over and actually carried the huge body on his shoulders. Enemies of the Epsilon level cannot be disposed of casually after being killed, as their corpses are also very important strategic resources. It can be used for research, or used in Zhoukir and Deng Shintong's biological laboratories for human transformation experiments. At this point, the battle between the aliens on the ground has completely ended. The demise of the Wulwan Empire was inevitable. There was war everywhere, and the Huashu coalition forces were carpet-clearing every remnant of the lizard men. Dear viewers, thanks for staying with me. We'll try to get you more updates. Please like and subscribe and share the video with your friends. Love you all.